diagram showing that you have the host organism. So this is the chromosome of the host organism or the recipient organism, which is Leu minus and Gal minus. So Gal is for galactose and Leu is for leucine. Okay. In B, what you see is that this particular host is Leu minus, Gal minus, and Bio minus. Okay, so now what we are trying to show in this figure is that with P1 transduction, so if you remember from yesterday's class, the length, the size of the genome, the size of the P1 is 100 kb. So that means if the markers are any two markers or any sequences which are in close proximity so that they can come within that 100 kb locus, they can be transduced together, correct? However, if the genes are far apart, then they cannot be transduced together. So for example, in this figure, if you see leucine, the marker for leucine in the host organism is almost diametrically opposite to gal and bio, correct? So in this case, when we do P1 transduction, right? So in this case, when we do P1 transduction, so with P1 transduction, in case of A, only Leu plus can be transferred, and therefore the recipient cell which was Leu minus will become Leu plus as a result of P1 transduction, but it is still Gal minus. Why? Because Leu and Gal are quite far apart, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Similarly, when we look at this one in the figure B, what we see is that gal and bio are in close proximity. So that means with P1 transduction, we can get either gal plus bio plus, but we cannot get a cell which is gal plus bio plus and Leu plus, because they all are gal and bio are in close proximity, but Leu is far apart. So therefore, by P1 transduction, you can get three types of transductants. So the colonies that are obtained by P1 transduction are called as transductants. So for example, in case of transformation, they are called as transformants. In case of transduction, they are called as transductants. In case of conjugation, they are called as transconjugants. So in this case, you see that some cells are Gal plus but still Bio minus. Some cells are Bio plus but still Gal minus and Leu minus. On the other hand, you see that some cells are Gal plus and Bio plus. So this tells you that Gal plus and Bio plus they are present in close proximity, and this trait can be conferred because of this proximity, and you can achieve a cell which is gal plus and bio plus. So this is called as these cells are called as co-transductants. So this is gal plus and bio plus, this is only bio plus, and the other one was only gal plus, right? So now let us see, this was only an example to show you that you can have single transduction or you have co-transduction. Co-transduction means two markers or more markers, 2, 3 or 4 markers can be transferred together if they are present in close proximity. And that proximity roughly spans the distance of about 100 kb, because 100 kb is the length of the genome of P1. So now let us try solving a problem to see how this works. So, so in this case, this is a separate case where the donor strain is Azi is azithromycin. So donor strain is azithromycin resistant, Leu plus and threonine plus. Okay, over here. Recipient is azithromycin sensitive, leucine minus and threonine minus. So what you do is you do P1 transduction. That means you incubate the donor strain with P1 so that these markers are packaged, and then this P1 which has likely packaged the donor DNA is now infected with the recipient strain, and then you score for the phenotype. So in this case, the observation was that out of the 100% cells which were Lu plus, only 50% were azithromycin, 50% cells gave azithromycin resistance, and only 2% gave threonine plus. So that means 100% Lu plus, 50% Azi, and 2% threonine plus. So this tells you that Lu and Azi are close by because you have 100% Lu and 50% Azi, so that means these are close by, but only 2% are threonine plus. So this tells you that leucine and threonine, it seems they are not so close, right? Because leucine is 100% and threonine is 2%. So then it says what is the order of the gene? Is it leucine 100%, azithromycin 50%, and threonine, or it is Azi, Leu, and threonine? So what is the order? So here students, please pay attention that this is not conjugation. So in conjugation, if you remember, the first marker which enters the cell is the one which gives you highest number of uh, colonies. You remember that? But in case of co-transduction, it is nothing that this one is entering first or the other one is entering first. The fragment would enter and you are going to score for. So this only tells you that the two markers are in close proximity. So from this experiment, what you know is that leucine and azithromycin are in close proximity, but you cannot say whether it's Leu Azi-Threo or it's Azi-Leu-Threo. So then what you do is you perform the next experiment, and in this case what you do is you select the threonine plus cells and then determine how many of them have the other two markers. So what was observed was out of the threonine plus cells, 3% cells were leucine plus and only 0%, that means none of the cells showed resistance to azithromycin. So what does this tell you? So this actually tells you that threonine is closer to leucine because threonine plus cells showed 3% resistance to leucine, but then threonine and Azi are far apart because they cannot be co-transduced, right? So this, from this you can deduce the order, that the order is actually threonine, leucine, and Azi, because threonine and Azi are so far apart that you cannot get co-transductance. So by doing such experiments, you can do the mapping of the genome. That means you can determine the markers which are in close proximity, and then by trying different combinations you can come up with the order of the gene. Hope it is clear to the class.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
So that means if I give you a few examples, I hope you will be able to determine the map, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. So then once you have learned, like we constructed, we learned in the class how to do the gene cloning and how to construct the clones, and then we also discussed that how can we map the how can we transfer the clone, for example, by transformation or by conjugation or by transduction. So by transformation, you can actually transform the plasmid, but by transformation also you can do integration. So in such cases, what we do is that we use plasmids which cannot replicate in a particular host. So what will happen is if they cannot replicate in a particular host, then they will not be maintained as an independent entity, and therefore depending upon the homology region, they will end up recombining with the host DNA, and thereby the plasmid can get integrated in the host DNA. So by transformation also you can get integrations in the chromosome. By conjugation, we you have already seen that we can get integrations using HFR strains, right? And by transduction also you can get integrations. So once you have generated the integrants, or once you have constructed the recombinant strains, right? So then the next step is how do we confirm that yes, the recombinant strain that you have constructed is correct. So the first way to confirm is by performing what you have already studied in the class, is restriction digestion. So you can simply perform restriction digestion, and in case of chromosomal integrations, restriction digestion should be followed by, for example, southern blotting, where the insert can be used as the probe, and then you can figure out whether the host DNA has the insert or not integrated in it. Correct? So restriction digestion followed by southern blotting can be one of the means for clone confirmation. Method for integration confirmation is PCR. So when is that you design PCR primers which can be site specific, region specific. So what I mean is that, for example, if let me uh, so for example, you have a gene for GFP which you have integrated in the chromosome, right? And in this case, for example, what you can do is you can design the primers for GFP. So let's say the dotted lines are the ones which is a GFP, and the greater than and less than symbols represent the host chromosomal DNA. So the dotted line is the GFP which is now integrated in the host chromosomal DNA. So in this case, site specific primers are the primers which are specific to the host DNA. So for example, site of integration. So this can be in the chromosome at 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 30 minutes, or 45 minutes as per the clock if it is circular chromosome. So you can make the integrations, you can select a particular site. So in this case, the primer that you are going to design will be specific to the chromosomal region. That means to the less than or greater than symbols. Region specific primers are actually what we call as gene specific primers. So in this you design the primers, for example, for GFP in this case. So you design the primers which are internal to the dotted region, right? So this way you can perform PCR. So you are going to perform three sets of PCR. Set 1, where you are going to use site specific primers, the one designed for less than or greater than symbol. Uh, Set 2, which is specific to the dotted region, which is the foreign gene which you have integrated, for example GFP. And set 3, where you can use one primer for GFP and one primer for the chromosomal boundaries. For example, one primer which is at this greater than symbol, and one primer which is at the dotted region. So using these three sets of primers, you can confirm that yes, your integration is correct and it is at the right place, right? But then the final confirmation is achieved by the technique which is called as DNA sequencing. So in this case, class, because you want to just confirm the clone, you are going to simply do Sanger's sequencing. So Sanger was a scientist who discovered the technique of sequencing for the first time, uh, and he was awarded Nobel also. And what he proposed was, he suggested that we can use dideoxynucleotides and carry out sequencing. So let us see what are these dideoxynucleotides and how can we carry out sequencing.
Ma'am,
Yes.
Ma'am, I didn't understood this PCR thing. Like in previous class, also I didn't understood. Like when you were talking about like how can we use a PCR in RFLP to avoid southern blotting. So, ma'am, if you can please clarify that.
Okay. So let me then write the sequence. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
For example, the sequence is GATTACG. Don't look at the repeats, है ना? I'm just typing. Something like this. ठीक. Now what you imagine is, let's say I have made an integration over here, and let's say this is the sequence which I have integrated in the chromosome. Change color. Okay. And the black part is the one which is the host DNA.
Yes, ma'am.
So
Yes.
this is host. This is the red sequence is the one which has been integrated either by conjugation or by using a non-replicative plasmid by transformation or by transduction, P1 transduction, and it has integrated, correct? So in order to confirm that yes, it has integrated only and only at this place, so what I mean by this is, let me, okay, maybe from this diagram. Maybe from this diagram. So the integration can happen over here. The integration can happen over here. The integration can happen at, so for circular chromosomes class, the when we talk about integrations, we talk about the distances in minutes, like the clock. So we say 15 minutes locus, 30 minutes locus, 45 minutes locus, 10 minutes locus, right? So for example, integration can happen anywhere, right? But then how to be absolutely sure that integration, for example in this case, has happened at the desired place? That means, let's say at 0 minutes or at 35 minutes only, correct? So for this, what you do is restriction digestion. I told you, you can do restriction digestion by a frequent 4 base pair cutter or a 6 base pair cutter, perform partial digestion, do southern blotting, design the probe which is specific to this red sequence, right? The probe is going to
Yes,
be
ma'am.
specific to this sequence, then perform hybridization, and then you will know, if you get a signal, then you know that yes, this has integrated,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
In case of
Yes.
PCR, what you do is you design a primer which is this, specific to this region. ठीक? This is set 1. You design another primer. This is reverse primer. So when you use this primer, maybe I'll have to change the color, or you will follow this.
Oh, we can follow. We can.
Okay. So for example, right. So one primer set is this. One primer set is this. So if we use this primer set, what is shown in blue and green, so what you are expecting is, if there is an integration, you are going to get a longer PCR amplicon. If there is no integration, you are going to get a shorter amplicon, correct?
Yes, ma'am. That I understood.
That you understood.
Yes, yes.
Now, in order to be sure that yes, the gene is present, what we do is you design, because see, when you have amplified, you are not sure what exactly got amplified, right? So what you do is that you design a primer which is internal to the gene. Maybe again I'll change the color, uh, this one, and then another primer, reverse primer, which is specific to this gene. ठीक? So
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
so in this case, you are going to get the amplicon, which will give you the exact sequence, which will give you the amplification of the gene. You are going to keep that amplicon also aside, the first amplicon also aside. Now what you do is you perform set 3, where you use this as the forward primer and you use this as the reverse primer, the purple one. So you are going to use a combination of green and purple. Green is forward and purple is reverse. If you get an amplicon, then you are absolutely sure that yes, it went to exactly the correct place and it is the same sequence which has gone to this place. Again, what you can do is you can use this primer as the forward and you can use the sky blue one as the reverse, and again you will get an amplicon that will tell you that yes, this is the correct size amplicon.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So
ma'am.
the point is the green and the sky blue ones are called as site specific primers because they can be specific to the site of integration, to 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes loci, right? And
Yes.
the yellow, I mean the brown and the purple one are the region specific or the gene specific.
Gene specific. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Clear? Follow?
Yes, ma'am. It is completely clear.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So finally, what you do is that once you obtain these applicons, then it is better, it is a good idea to confirm the sequence by sequencing. So because these are shorter, usually smaller applicons, so you can perform what is called as Sanger sequencing. So when we talk about Sanger sequencing, so have you studied this before, class?
No, ma'am. No, not in any courses.
Okay, so in Sanger sequencing, what he proposed was he suggested that instead of DNTPs, we can use dideoxy NTPs. So dideoxy NTPs, they differ in the fact that you do not have a 3' hydroxyl group. Okay, so that means in the absence of the 3' hydroxyl group in the dideoxynucleotide, the chain will get terminated. Correct? Because if you remember, the chain extends from the 3' hydroxyl group. You remember that?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, yes. That I remember.
Right. So
Yes.
therefore, Sangar's idea was to use dideoxy. So he was the first one to introduce this concept of dideoxynucleotides for DNA sequencing. So let us see how exactly he did it. So for that, the requirements are, this is the name of the scientist, Fred Sanger or Frederick Sanger, discovered it in 1970s. So in this case, what the requirements are, you require a template DNA because you, for example, a PCR product or whatever that you want to sequence, right? For example, we got amplicons from here, but we would like to determine the sequence. Yes. So you require, so in this case, this template DNA can be a PCR product or it can be a restriction digestion fragment. You require a polymerase. So the polymerase that are used are actually called sequenase because they are used for sequencing, and also polymerase and T7 DNA polymerase were also proposed that they can be used, but sequenase is the one which is most commonly used. You require dideoxynucleotides. So dideoxy I explained you just now. They lack the 3' hydroxyl group. You require DNTPs, the normal DNTPs, right?
Yes.
And what you require is radio labeled isotopes, but sometimes we do not use radio labeled isotopes. Sometimes we use fluorescently tagged compounds as well.
Yes, ma'am.
So then the question is, how exactly do we do sequencing? So for sequencing, the basis is somewhat similar to what we do it in PCR. Okay, so I will first explain you the way in the initial days sequencing was done. And for that, if you remember, we were discussing in yesterday's class about M13, the filamentous phage. So
Yes, ma'am.
M13 phage was used, which has a small genome of 6.4 kb. And what is important to note over here is that unlike lambda phage, so in case of lambda phage, the genome consists of double-stranded DNA, but in M13 phage, the genome is single-stranded DNA. So this is important to remember that it is single-stranded DNA. Okay. So if you see the life cycle of M13 phage, so this is how the structure of M13 phage looks like. So as we discussed in yesterday's class, it is filamentous phage. The proteins which are surrounding, which appear like the fish scales, they are all coat proteins. So what you see at the top and the bottom, the fish scales, they are the protein 8, and what you see at the edges, which are like pinheads or something, so they are protein 3 and 6, and here they are 7 and 9. So it is the protein 3 which is required for infection. So what you see is that the DNA of the phage is single stranded DNA, right? But when it infects the bacterial cell, so this is important for you to understand, class. That is why I'm showing you the entire life cycle. So when it is present in the M13 phage, the genome is single stranded. Okay, but the moment it enters the bacterial cell, so inside the bacterial cell, the DNA gets replicated and you have a double stranded DNA formed, right? This double-stranded DNA, then again because of rolling circle replication, it gets replicated, and single-stranded DNA is again packaged inside the in the periplasmic space. So in case of M13, the assembly takes place in the periplasmic space, and you have virions created which contain single-stranded DNA. So by this life cycle, what I wanted to show you over here is that inside the bacterial cell, M13 can exist as double-stranded DNA. I mean the genome of M13 can be double-stranded, but inside the virus, it is single-stranded. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so then what people did was they constructed vectors based upon this M13 phage DNA. So this vector is called M13 MP18. So here they had cloned the multiple cloning site, and this is the non-essential region for was used for cloning uh, the gene of interest. But then later on, what people did was they thought that in this case we need to deal with all the time M13 uh, filamentous phage only. So then what they did was, another development that was done was phage-mid vectors were constructed. So phage-mid vectors are the ones which contain phage origin of replication and plasmid origin of replication. So that means they contain two origin of replication, one for phage-mid, one for phage origin, and one for plasmid, and that is why it is called phage for phage origin and plasmid ka mid, and that is why they named it as phage-mid. So what you see is that in this particular map, which is a plasmid map, this F1 origin is actually the phage origin, F is for filamentous phage, and PUC origin is for plasmid origin. So the idea is that, so listen to me carefully. So the idea is that when we want to do sequencing, you need single stranded DNA. So in the earlier days, what people did was, instead of using PCR or instead of using methods for denaturation of the double stranded DNA, what they did was they were using these M13 based vectors, either phage-mid vectors or M13 based phage vectors, and they used to prepare single stranded DNA by simply isolating the DNA from the M13 phage. So the way the experiment can be done is, for example, if you want to determine, let's say, the sequence of this amplicon, correct? If you want to determine the sequence of this amplicon between the green and the sky blue, what you do is you clone this amplicon over here in the multiple cloning site. This cloning can be done from in a plasmid, because this is a plasmid, and this cloning can be done in a bacterial cell, and now the class knows how to do the cloning, correct? You can perform restriction digestion, you can digest the PCR amplicon as well, and you can clone it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So once you have obtained this clone, then what you do is you can actually infect this cell with M13 phage. Right. Once you infect this cell with M13 phage, so in this case what we use is a helper phage, particularly for this plasmid. So this helper phage actually has a defective origin of replication, but it will have, so defective origin of replication means its origin of replication is weak, but then it will make all the phage coat proteins. So what it will do is that it will start packaging this plasmid DNA, which will contain the desired amplicon cloned at the multiple cloning site. So as a result of this, virions will be created, which will contain in fact this P blue script 2 DNA containing the clone. These virions will be released in the medium. So ultimately you will have two populations. So you have virions which are released in the medium, right? And in the cell pellet you have bacterial cells. So bacterial cells will contain the double-stranded P blue script DNA, and the virions will contain single-stranded P blue script DNA. Is it clear or no?
Yes, ma'am, it is clear. But ma'am, how do we insert this DNA into bacteria? This plasmid.
Oh, because you can just do transformation. We have discussed the methods. You can just
Okay,
transform
okay,
it. It is a plasmid, right? It has phage
okay,
origin as well as plasmid origin.
okay.
So this
So
can be just
transduction doesn't.
you
So
can just perform transformation, so then this will go inside the bacterial cell. Now what you do is you perform infection with M13 phage, but instead of the regular phage you use helper phage. And the reason we use helper phage is because you want P blue script DNA to be packaged in more amounts. So therefore we use helper phage, because helper phage has the phage DNA, but it has a defective origin of replication. So as a result of this, the F1 origin which is present in P blue script will make more copies as compared to the helper phage copies. So as a result of which more copies of M13 will be created which contain P blue script DNA, because the F1 origin is more active here. Is
yes,
it
ma'am.
clear or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Everybody, Ashi followed or no? Are you there?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here only. I did follow.
Okay, very good. What about others, Paras? Paras Chaudhary, are you there or no? Left already.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here. I
Okay.
understood.
Okay, so hope it is clear to
Yes, ma'am.
everyone. Okay, very good. So this was the way people were actually initially doing sequencing. I mean, initially preparing the single-stranded template for sequencing. So let us now move one step further, that how exactly we can get the sequence. So for this you need to pay attention again for uh, so let's see, this is the template. The template is actually the single stranded DNA, correct? What you require for sequencing is a primer class. What you
Yes, ma'am.
require for sequencing is a primer, and what you also require is a DNA polymerase, which I told you is sequenase in this case. Now what
Yes,
you
ma'am.
do is you add dideoxynucleotides and also you add DNTPs. So,
Yes.
so in this case you have added DNTPs like DGTP, DCTP, DTTP and DATP. Also, along with this, you have added dideoxy GTP. So this is performed in tube number 1. So similarly, you perform another set of experiment in tube number 2, where instead of DDGTP, you add dideoxy CTP. Correct? In tube number 3, you add dideoxy TTP. In tube number 4, you add dideoxy ATP. So you have all the DNTPs, but then in individual tubes, you add either dideoxy GTP or CTP or TTP or ATP. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
So tube 1, tube 2, tube 3 and tube 4 all will have the same primer, all will have the same DNA polymerase, all will have the same buffer which is required for the action of polymerase, and all will have the same template DNA for which you need to perform sequencing. And the preparation of single-stranded DNA now you are aware of. For example, the M13 method. I will tell you in a second that we can also use the conventional methods of PCR and others. But let us see the experiment. So once you once you allow the PCR to bind and once you allow this to extend, then what will happen is different type of products will be created. Correct? So this is the template DNA.
Ma'am, just one question.
Huh.
Ma'am, so M13 DNA is M13 genome inside the M13 is single stranded, so it doesn't forms what is called hairpin structures.
So yes, it can form hairpin structures, but then, so in this case, it can form hairpin structures, yes, but then what they have demonstrated is in the earlier days, they used two different experiments were performed with two different polymerases, T7 polymerase and polymerase. So they found that the T7 polymerase, when used, it could take care of even the secondary structures. But now, these days, when we perform sequencing, what we do is we use the equipment called thermal cycler, the PCR machine that I have taught you. And in this case, you raise the temperature, so then the DNA gets denatured, and then you allow the primer to bind, and then you extend.
So, ma'am,
Right.
ma'am, at that time, was it not found that when we heat this DNA, then it will denature and we can get single strand DNA? So why, if it was discovered at that time, people know that, then why did they use M13 virus instead of just simply denaturing the DNA using heat?
Right, so therefore, so when they use, so this M13 based method was one of the earliest methods, and that is why even now you will find that these vectors are available and they are used all the time. So the idea is that, so there are 3 points in fact, or 2 points. So point number one, when you are separating the DNA from M13, so in this case you are absolutely sure that you are getting single-stranded DNA, right? And the
Yes,
length
ma'am.
of single stranded DNA can be long. For example, you can easily get up to 10 kb of single stranded DNA. When we use PCR machine or thermal cycler, you are worried that if there are highly GC rich sequences, whether the denaturation is best or not. So there are issues. So people do use M13 at times, but then for day-to-day applications, for shorter amplicons, the conventional thermal cycler is good enough.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
So in this case, what you see is that the black one is the template DNA, right? So the sequence starts with G, T, C. So in case of dideoxy GTP, the chain can terminate here at CAG. The chain can terminate at the second G. The chain can terminate at third G. Correct? Class?
Yes, ma'am. It can
So for
terminate at
example,
anywhere.
here, if you see the chain has terminated at the third G, correct? Here, if you see the chain has terminated at the fourth G. Here, the chain has terminated at the fifth G. Here, it has terminated at the seventh G. And here, it has terminated at the last G. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
and why the chain has terminated, not at other places in, for example, this one. So what I want to tell you over here is that because in the tube you have a mixture of DNTPs and dideoxy GTP. So therefore DNTPs will get incorporated, and it will be an event of probability that at times there will be some population where G will be incorporated at the third place, some population where it will be incorporated at the fourth, fifth, seventh and last place. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now what we do is we try to separate these fragments by electrophoresis. So in this case, the conventional electrophoresis that I have taught you already is used, and these are small oligos. So tell me, which one should we use? Agarose or polyacrylamide?
Ma'am, polyacrylamide.
Yes, so you're going to use polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis in this case, and because these are small oligos, so we use like 20% polyacrylamide gels. And in this case, we perform denaturing polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis so that the strands are separated. And then what you can do is you can analyze them. So over here, for example, let me make it smaller. So these are the various products which are obtained, and they can be analyzed on these gels. So these are big gels. The conventional older gels, they were like really big, up to 70 centimeter in length, like really long gels, and they are thin, for example 0.4 millimeter thick. So what you do is ultimately from this sequence you can get different types of um, these chain terminated molecules, correct? And now what you do is you run it on a gel. So once you analyze it on a gel class, you can actually determine the sequence. So this is tube number 1, this is the sequence from tube number 2, this is the one from tube number 3, and this is the one from tube number 4. Okay,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
what is done is that this dideoxy molecule is labeled with a radioisotope. For example, you can use P32. In this case also you can use P32, and for C and T also you use P32 labeled dideoxy nucleotide. So as a result of this, when you load it in individual lanes, all GACT, all these 4 lanes will show up, and actually what we develop is called an autoradiogram, because in this case radioisotopes are used. So let us see how this kind of gel is prepared, right? So remember, this was the template, correct? So from this template, so for G, we have already discussed. You have third G, you have fourth G, you have fifth G, you have seventh G, and then you have last G, correct? When you have dideoxy ATPs, then you see that the first A will come where? Class.
At the eighth position.
Hmm. No, but
And with
then
that,
so okay, so I'll tell you in a second about the second position. Okay, so then the next A will come here, and so on, right? The final A's. Likewise, when you will have the dideoxy CTP, then you see that the entire sequence has one G between AGA, so you get a C over here, right? In case of dideoxy TTP, you will get the chain terminated at these positions. So ultimately you will get these kind of um, chain terminated molecules. So the smallest is this one. Now if we compare the length of these chain terminated molecules, this is the smallest, 3 nucleotides, right? This is 4, this is 5, this is 6, this is 7, this is 8, this is 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 14. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
therefore class, when we run them on a gel, we get the smallest one here, then the next one, then the next one. So these are not simple G's. What you are seeing is the migration of CAG. In this case, what you are seeing is the migration of CAGG, correct? Here you are seeing the migration of CAGGG. Here you are seeing the migration of CAGGG and A. So ultimately, sorry. So ultimately, you will get an autoradiogram which will look something like this. And then you can read the sequence, which is G, 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 A, G, T, C, T, A, G, A. Correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So this is how you can actually determine the sequence. And from this you can also tell what exactly is the direction of sequencing. So for example, the sequence is reading from 5 prime to 3 prime, correct? 5 prime CAG. So we are getting the sequence from 5 prime to 3 prime.
Yes, ma'am.
And then based upon that you can also tell the sequence of the template.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, that will be complementary.
So ultimately this is an example of the real gel. So that was a depictive picture, but this is the example of a real sequencing gel. And who is going to try reading the sequence from 5 prime end? Just attempt it and I will know whether you have followed.
Ma'am, I can read what or okay. Should I read?
Hmm.
Ma'am, but the whole picture, can you just make it one? Yes, yes. Yes, now I can. So, oh,
The order is GATC. Anybody else would like to try? Let me see who else is there.
Yes, ma'am, I
Deepak
can
is
try.
there. Ashi, would you like to try? Dev Priya is there.
Ma'am, it will be AGAATTC
Hmm.
G
Okay.
C
Now
and
anybody
A.
else? Hold on, Deepak. Let others also try.
Ma'am, after what Deepak has said or from the start?
After Deepak.
Just a second. I guess he left at A.
Hmm.
So after A, it's T, C, T, 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 T,
Okay.
A.
Okay. So I think everybody followed more or less. Sanger sequencing is clear. So Sanger sequencing, so even those students, next generation sequencing that you will learn in the genomics course, and there are many other methods which have been developed for whole genome sequencing. Sanger sequencing is still the method of choice for clone confirmation. So whenever the amplicon size is like in the range of 500 base pairs or 1 kb, or even for smaller plasmids, nobody would suggest the NGS methods. You simply go for Sanger sequencing. The only advancement in this technique that has been made is that instead of these long 20 by 70 centimeter long gels and handling these long glass plates, what has been developed is a tiny capillary, and they call it as capillary electrophoresis. So what they do is that in the tiny capillary they pack uh, the gel, the polyacrylamide gel, along with formamide, which is the denaturant. And then what you do is, so capillary, as the name itself says, it's a tiny capillary. And then in the capillary, you pack the polyacrylamide gel, along with the denaturant, of course, which can be formamide. means what you do is that because it's a tiny capillary, so you cannot have separate wells for G, separate well for A, separate well for T, and separate well for C. So what is done is that fluorescently labeled dideoxy molecules are used. So one is labeled with red, one is labeled with green, one is labeled with yellow, right? And all of these are mixed together, right? And they are detected based upon fluorescence. Because the signal is different, there is no need to for example, use separate lanes or anything. In the same capillary you can run the entire mixture and you will get what is called as a chromatogram. So this is the capillary. It's a 50 centimeter capillary which is 50 microns in diameter. There is a laser which is used for detection of the signal. There is a CCD camera which is attached to a photomultiplier tube, which actually captures the signal and sends it to the computer. And then what you get is what is called as an electropherogram, which depending upon the type of fluorescence will actually give you the signal. Is it clear or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So once you have learned Sanger sequencing, I will quickly tell you that how Sanger sequencing can be used for determining the sequence of larger fragments. So Sanger sequencing is good for up to 500 base pairs. But when you have a longer sequence which is like 10 kb or 12 kb, then how do we do Sanger sequencing? So in this case, the way you do Sanger sequencing is that you design a PCR primer which is specific to the vector sequence. Then you perform sequencing. You will get a sequence of about, the read length varies from 500 to 1 kb. The most reliable is up to 500 base pairs only, but sometimes you can go up to 1 kb. So you get the sequence. Again, you design a primer based upon the sequence obtained. Again you march 500 base pair to 1 kb. Again you design a primer and again you march. So this way you can actually march the entire 10 or 12 kb region by every time walking up to 500 base pairs or 1 kb. So this method is also called as genome walking. This is called as genome walking because you can walk through the genome by designing primers in a stepwise manner. Followed?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. This way.
Okay. Then the other way of doing the whole genome sequencing using Sanger's method is, which is called as shotgun sequencing. So in shotgun sequencing class, what is done is what is shown at the top is the chromosomal DNA. So this chromosomal DNA is fragmented into very, very small pieces, for example, up to 500 base pairs or 1 kb. And then these fragments are actually cloned in a plasmid, and here you can use the plasmids, for example, PUC19, and perform lumen screening, right? Screen the right colonies, perform sequencing, Sanger sequencing using vector specific primers which are designed based upon the vector sequence.
So, ma'am, it is kind of preparing genome library.
Yes, it is kind of preparing genome library, and then based upon the
And then
sequences, you will align the overlapping regions which is shown here, and then generate the sequence.
yes, ma'am.
So this is called as shotgun sequencing. Hope it is clear to everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so very good. So that finishes the section on gene transfer, and then we discussed clone confirmation by restriction digestion followed by southern or by PCR or by sequencing. So once your clone is confirmed and once your plasmid has entered the cell, or once you have confirmed the integration, the next step is to study the DNA replication. The DNA replication of the plasmid, of the clone, and also of the chromosome. So that opens the next topic, which is DNA replication. And I guess this you people have studied already. So maybe I'll quickly go through it, or you need a break, or you are already
Ma'am,
done with, huh?
we can go.
You can go means can we continue, or you want to?
Yes, ma'am, we can continue.
Okay. Everybody,
Ma'am,
Ashik,
can you explain,
Deepak say.
ma'am, can you explain whole genome sequencing again? Because I didn't get it. Like, if we break the genome in different segments, then how we will identify, how we will design primer for those sequences, that how we know that uh, this is the fragment and this is the particular primer that we designed for it.
Right. Right. So Deepak, in this case, you are designing primer in a step by manner. This is walking, right? This is clear, I guess, right?
Yes, ma'am.
But in this case, Deepak, shotgun sequencing. So in this case, you do not design primers at all. What you do is that you simply clone it in PUC19 or PUC18, small fragments of 500 to 1 KB. Prepare a huge library, very large, very large library, and you use vector specific primers for sequencing. So for example, you will get multiple amplicons, you get multiple sequences, so and then you try aligning these sequences based upon the overlap,
Okay, ma'am, I got it.
right? So you have multiple such sequences, and then based upon the overlap you start aligning them and then regenerate the sequence.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Satyakam, Paras, is it clear?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so then and you are going to learn NGS and for example nanopore and many other sequencing techniques in other courses like 733 and maybe in bioinformatics as well. Okay, so let's start with DNA replication. So DNA replication, I guess you people have studied already, so I'm going to quickly cover it. So DNA replication, the method of DNA replication is semi-conservative, and this was demonstrated by a scientist called Michelson. So this is the person, Michelson and Frank Stahl, who demonstrated that DNA replication is actually semi-conservative. So the way they demonstrated that DNA replication is semi-conservative was by performing an experiment where what they did was they took an E. coli cell, right, from a Petri plate. They grew it in a medium which contained N15. So N15 is the isotope. So they labeled it with N15 and they started the sampling, right? So what they found was the entire DNA was labeled with N15, that is shown in tube number 1. Now what they did was they took an aliquot from this tube and transferred it in another tube which contained N14. From this N14 tube, now they started doing the sampling after every doubling time. So for example, for E. coli, the doubling time is 20 minutes. In rich medium, in minimal medium or synthetic medium, the doubling time is 1 hour. So depending upon the medium, they started sampling after every 1 hour or after every 20 minutes. So what they found was in tube number 2, when they collected the first sample, they found that there was a shift in the position of the DNA. So this is density gradient centrifugation that was performed. So they found that this was lighter than the first tube because part of it was heavy and part of it was lighter. In the next sampling, they found that there was another band which appeared which was even lighter. So this is what is shown in tube number 3. So here what is shown is N14, and in the middle what is shown is a mixture of N14 and N15. In the final sampling, most of it was labeled with N14. So this suggested that the DNA replication is not conservative, but it is semi-conservative. It is not dispersive, it is not conservative, but it is semi-conservative. So this was the initial experiments which demonstrated that DNA replication is semi-conservative. Later on, Arthur Kornberg discovered several enzymes which are required for DNA replication. For example, polymerase was the first one to be discovered. So for DNA replication, what we require is an origin of replication, which is called as ORI-C. C is for chromosome. So origin of replication of chromosome is always called ORI-C. Origin of replication of plasmids is sometimes given as ORI5 or ORI-P1 or ORI, depending upon the type of plasmid, ORI RSF1010, something like this. But the chromosomal origin is always written as ORI-C. The length of this origin of replication is usually small. It can vary from 250 to 300 base pairs. And the most important feature is that out of the whole genome or out of the whole plasmid or out of the entire sequence, this is the sequence which is highly rich in AT. It is AT rich. So what you do is, if you perform a bioinformatics experiment where you perform a GC-SKU analysis, then what you will find is the region which has the highest AT content. Highest AT content is the region which is origin of replication. And this method, this technique of GC-SKU is also used for identification of origin of replication of unknown plasmids or unknown chromosomes. So usually this is the region which opens up for replication first, and therefore it has the highest AT content. For initiation of replication, you require initiator proteins. So for chromosomal DNA, the initiator protein is usually DNA A, but for certain other plasmids, for example for P1, it is Rep A. For example for Vibrio, it is Vibrio, it is called RCTB. Same as DNA A, it is the initiator of replication. So if we now look at the structure of the origin of replication, so this whole sequence is roughly 250 to 300 base pairs in length. What is unique is that it contains 9 mer repeats, and these 9 mer repeats are actually DNA A binding sites. DNA A is the initiator of replication, and this initiator of replication, it binds to the 9 mer sequences. There are 13 mer regions which are highly rich in AT sequences. The 9 mers are not that AT rich, but the 13 mers are highly rich in AT. So what happens is that the DNA A, which is the initiator protein, it recognizes the 9 mer sequences, it binds to the 9 mer sequences, and the moment it binds to the 9 mer sequences, it creates a kind of torsional stress, as a result of which this 13 mer repeat, it opens up because it is very rich in AT sequences, and then it leads to the formation of what is called as a replication bubble. Okay, class. Follow it.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
And often not one DNA A but multiple copies of DNA A are required. So one DNA A binds and then multiple DNA A's are recruited, and then the 13-mer opens up. These are the various enzymes which are required for DNA replication. So the first step is initiator protein binds to and then separates the strands. The second step is the helicase. So helicase separates the strands at the replication fork. The enzyme gyrase relieves the supercoiling. The enzyme primase creates a short RNA primer. The enzyme DNA polymerase 3 extends the strand. The enzyme DNA polymerase 1 replaces the RNA primer, and the ligase is actually required for the repair, for the sealing of the nick, because ultimately when the primase removes the RNA primer, then primer ultimately when the DNA polymerase 1 removes the RNA primer, then ultimately the nick has to be sealed by the ligase. So, what I will do is, just to make this topic easier and interesting, I will show you a quick video and then we will go through the slides quickly.
Yes, ma'am.
So I think what I remember is that you people have studied DNA replication, but what you have not studied is regulation of replication, correct?
मैम आई मतलब हम लोगों ने मतलब बहुत ज्यादा डिटेल में नहीं स्टडी किया था बट
Okay, so let's see. We'll stop there. So this is a small video of I think 3 or 4 minutes. You can have a look. It explains the process very nicely. Also, it is like textbook knowledge.
During DNA replication, the DNA molecule is duplicated to generate two identical copies. The correct
Students or no?
is of vital importance to the cell.
we can hear.
Used into the DNA may lead to heritable mutations that could be deleterious to the cell or organism. Thus, elaborate machinery is used both to assure correct copying and to allow the process to be regulated. Coupling of the two DNA polymerases, one for each strand, allows the process of fork movement to be coordinated. To understand how polymerases are coupled to the replication fork, we will first show a standard representation of the replication fork. In this typical representation, two DNA polymerases are moving in opposite directions.
So you see DNA helicase is there, it's like a ring.
And the other copying
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
You see lagging strand and leading strand, this is the helicase.
Yes. Yes. This is elegant.
ring-shaped complex called DNA helicase first separates the parental DNA strands. This separation gives the DNA polymerases the access they need to allow copying. The new DNA strand is always made in the 5' to 3' direction. Because the replication of the two DNA strands is coupled, the leading strand is copied continuously, while the lagging strand is copied in short stretches called Okazaki fragments. Each Okazaki fragment is initiated by a primase that synthesizes a short RNA primer. This primer is later elongated by DNA polymerase. The single-stranded DNA between the newly made Okazaki fragments is bound by single-stranded binding protein, or SSB. In order for the two polymerases to move together with the helicase as the fork moves, the DNA template for the lagging strand must be looped around so that both polymerases are moving in the same direction.
This is called trombone models class.
DNA replication can proceed
हेलो मैम वो इको आ रही है हाँ अब सही है
Once the lagging strand polymerase reaches the RNA primer from the upstream Okazaki fragment, the lagging strand loop is released. Okazaki fragment maturation and ligation by polymerase 1 and DNA ligase.
What did you say? You were saying something?
Can you mute your mic because there is an echo? We can't clearly hear the sound.
Okay, 1 second, I muted.
coordinates to the cell, as errors that are introduced into the DNA may lead to heritable mutations that could be deleterious to the cell or organism. Thus, an elaborate machinery is used both to assure correct copying and to allow the process to be regulated. Coupling of the two DNA polymerases, one for each strand, allows the process of fork movement to be coordinated. To understand how polymerases are coupled at a replication fork, we will first show a standard representation of the replication fork. In this typical representation, two DNA polymerases are moving in opposite directions, with one copying the leading strand of the DNA and the other copying the lagging strand. To expose the single-stranded DNA at the replication fork, a six-membered ring-shaped complex called DNA helicase first separates the parental DNA strands. This separation gives the DNA polymerases the access they need to allow copying. The new DNA strand is always made in the 5' to 3' direction. Because the replication of the two DNA strands is coupled, the leading strand is copied continuously, while the lagging strand is copied in short stretches called Okazaki fragments. Each Okazaki fragment is initiated by a primase that synthesizes a short RNA primer. This primer is later elongated by DNA polymerase. The single-stranded DNA between the newly made Okazaki fragments is bound by single-stranded binding protein, or SSB. In order for the two polymerases to move together with the helicase as the fork moves, the DNA template for the lagging strand must be looped around so that both polymerases are moving in the same direction. With the polymerases now coupled, DNA replication can proceed coordinately on both the leading and the lagging strand. Once the lagging strand polymerase reaches the RNA primer from the upstream Okazaki fragment, the lagging strand loop is released, and Okazaki fragment maturation and ligation by polymerase I and DNA ligase occurs. While this maturation is occurring, the primase enzyme that is also traveling with the fork as part of the replosome initiates a new RNA primer on the lagging strand. Once this primer is made, the lagging strand polymerase on the replosome, having completed synthesis of the previous lagging strand, then re-engages with the 3' end of the new primer, forming a new loop on the lagging strand. DNA synthesis thus proceeds with the leading strand polymerase continuously engaged with the DNA, and the lagging strand polymerase engaging and disengaging as each Okazaki fragment is synthesized. To synthesize the lagging strand, the DNA template is looped out while it is coupled to the replosome complex, and the loop is released after each Okazaki fragment is completed. The length of the looped DNA at its maximal size is therefore the length of an Okazaki fragment, which in bacteria is about 1000 base pairs.
So hope it was clear, students.
Yes, ma'am. It was very, very clear.
So that looping model is actually called trombone model, class. So I think this lists the various enzymes, and then we have already discussed that how the initiation takes place. So DNA is the initiator protein. It binds to the 9-mer sequences. What is shown in the purple dots are the single-stranded binding protein, which binds to the single-stranded DNA, which is called as SSB, and it's the helicase which keeps moving. And then you have the DNA polymerases. So here there are actually what is important to tell you over here is that there are in fact 3 DNA polymerases in bacteria: DNA polymerase 1, polymerase 2, and polymerase 3. So all 3 polymerases have 5' to 3' polymerase activity. All 3 polymerases have 3' to 5' proofreading activity, but only and only DNA polymerase 1. So this is important to remember, class, that only and only DNA polymerase 1 has 5' to 3' exonuclease activity. So that means the removal of RNA primer is possible only and only by the DNA polymerase 1, because it is this polymerase only which possesses 5' to 3' exonuclease activity. Then I think we already discussed the role of primer. It is required for the synthesis of uh, the primer, and this is about the DNA polymerase 1 that I mentioned to you, that it has 5' to 3' exonuclease activity. Then I think I quickly, if the process was clear from the video, so then this is how it shows that the DNA polymerase 1 removes the primer and ultimately the nicks are joined by DNA ligase. So then if the process of replication is clear to you, I would like to straight away move to the end replication problem, which I had told you that we will discuss when I was teaching you telomeres. You remember that?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Right. So this end replication problem is the problem which is there with linear chromosomes. So if you have understood the process of DNA replication, so when the chromosome is circular class, you have a leading strand and you have a lagging strand synthesized, right? And in the lagging strand you have Okazaki fragments synthesized, and the length of these Okazaki fragments for bacteria are roughly in the range of 1000 to 2000 base pairs. For eukaryotes, these Okazaki fragments are in the range of 200 to 400 base pairs, but for bacteria these are 1000 to 2000 base pairs. This we also discussed that as a result of trombone model, where the DNA can loop out and therefore the polymerase can be coupled and replication can move in one direction, correct? From the video? Yes or
Yes,
no?
ma'am. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So therefore replication in circular chromosome or in circular plasmids is never a problem, because the DNA is circular and all the time it will have a DNA template onto which you can have the RNA primer synthesized. You can have a DNA template onto which you can have RNA primer synthesized. So this is the lagging strand, this is the leading strand, correct? When it is circular, but when it is linear class, when the situation is when it is linear, then the problem becomes difficult, because when it is linear, then what will happen is the DNA polymerase 1, correct, the DNA polymerase 1 will remove this RNA primer and will carry out the synthesis. The 5' to 3' exonuclease activity will remove the RNA primer and will carry out the synthesis. But then this DNA polymerase 1, this actually performs the process in a template dependent manner. So this is important for you to understand this, that DNA polymerase 1, it requires a primer. It cannot, it requires something for extension. So what will happen is that when, for example, this primer is removed, then actually there is a gap, because there is nothing over here, because it's a linear DNA.
Yes, ma'am.
So therefore there is a gap which is created at the ends, and this problem is called as end replication problem, because the ends are not replicated. And the reason the ends are not replicated is because once the primer is removed, once the primer is not there, then the DNA cannot be synthesized, because the DNA is synthesized only and only based upon another. It requires something onto which the DNTPs are incorporated. You remember from PCR that we required a DNA primer, and then we had the incorporation of DNTPs. You remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
A
So,
few base pairs of extra sequences.
right. So in the absence of that primer, you cannot have PCR. You cannot incorporate DNTPs. You remember that?
Yes.
So this is what is called as an end replication problem. So in end replication problem, the ends of the chromosome of linear, when the chromosome is linear, so this end replication problem is true only and only for linear DNA. For circular DNA, it is not a problem. So the ends are not replicated and therefore these regions are removed. And these are the main causes of aging, graying of hairs or wrinkles or aging, all kinds of problems. So therefore, let's see. So it says that as cell division continues, the end of each new DNA strand gets shorter and shorter, and 50 base pair to 250 base pairs are lost per cell division. So then the point is, what is the role of telomeres? So the telomeres are actually long strand of repeated DNA sequences at the end of each chromosome in humans. And in humans, the repeated sequences which are present in the telomeric region is this: TTA and triple G. Right? So these are repetitive sequences which are present in the telomeric region. These telomeres can keep getting shortening. So imagine if there are no telomeres, then if the end replication problem will continue, then ultimately you will lose all the genes which are essential for the viability, and the person will not survive. The fetus will die. Correct? So that is the importance of telomere. So telomeres, they keep decreasing as we age. So for example, this is the telomere length in human blood cells. So you have the length of about 8,000, and then at the age of 35 you are almost less than half, and at the age of 65 you have negligible. Right?
Yes, ma'am. So just by knowing the telomere length, we can determine the person's age.
Yes. Yes. So, but then not all cells telomeres get shorter as they divide. So there are certain cells which are embryonic stem cells, germ cells or cancer cells. So these cells, they express certain enzymes called telomerases, and these telomerases, they can repair and lengthen the telomeres. So shortening of telomeres can happen in most of the cells other than germ cells, stem cells and cancer cells, because these cells contain the enzyme called telomerase, and telomerase enzyme actually contains in itself. So this telomerase enzyme actually has a protein component and it also has an RNA component attached to it. So this is called as an RNA dependent DNA polymerase, which has a built-in RNA template. Okay, so telomerase is not just a polymerase, but it has a built-in RNA template. So that means if you look at the structure of the telomerase, this telomerase has the protein component and it has an RNA component. So what happens is that this RNA component actually binds to the repeat sequences of the telomeric DNA. It pairs up, and because the telomerase is an RNA dependent DNA polymerase, so therefore the telomerase protein will actually incorporate the DNA onto this RNA, and ultimately it will extend the length of the telomere.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So this is how a telomerase works. So if telomerase is not there in these cells, then telomere shortening will happen in those strains, those cells as well. Right?
Yes. Yes.
So then so I think I will so hope this process, I will just show you the diagram of the trombone model which was shown in the video that I showed you. So in the video it was very clear, but this is a typical diagram showing the looping, that the leading strand continues and in the lagging strand you have this looping done, and therefore overall directionality of the DNA replication is maintained. So I think if I will not continue any further. We will discuss the simple problems of related to DNA replication, and we will discuss briefly about rolling circle replication and regulation of replication in the next class possibly. So because I do not want you people to just get overpacked, I would wish that whatever uh, we have discussed today, I think it was clear.
Yes,